Alright guys, it's time. It's time for the video that I've been dreading making. This is going to be part 3 of my pilot management and training tutorial series. And why, do you ask, did I regret or dread making this video? And I'll tell you why. I feel that pilot training is one of the most complicated aspects of the whole pilot management system. The game itself is very light on details in the manuals and how this works. It does give you some ideas of how it works, but it doesn't really tell you how to do it. And instead, there's a lot of speculation, anecdotal evidence, and opinion based on a lot of people on how to go about doing this. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm somewhere in between anecdotal evidence and empirical evidence, where I actually record numbers and see how things change. So what I'm going to do today is give you an understanding of how training works and some ways to go about doing it. Now, this video is not necessarily intended to the game veterans. You guys probably know more about this than even I do. This video is intended for very new players who know they need to train pilots but don't have a clue how to do it. So I'm going to do my best to explain to you basically the theory behind how this works. And then I'm going to show you some tips on how to go about actually performing the training and how to determine when it's time to move your pilots from a training environment to a combat environment. So grab yourself a drink, get yourself a snack. This might be a little bit of a long one because there's a lot to talk about. The first thing we're going to talk about is the most important thing about pilot training, and that is making a plan. Let's take a look at that. Okay, let's talk about planning. So take a look at this graphic here. I got this from a member from my Discord server. He found this and brought it to my attention. I did not make this. This is not my own work. If this is your work, if this is your doing, please let me know so I can give you the proper credit, because this is a really cool thing that we have here, so I can use it as an exemplar. So what is this? This is another player's pilot training chart. This is what he designed for himself to guide his training. So let me briefly explain how something like this works, because you may want to set up something similar for yourself. Obviously, for the Americans or allies rather, you may have a different technique or vision on how you want to train your pilots. But this is how this particular person wants to do their Japanese pilots. So he's broken it down to all the different types of fighter or air pilots he wants to have in his repertoire, all the way from a fighter pilot to a transport pilot. And then over here, he's got training time and durations, okay, all the way down to 12 weeks, which is obviously 3 months. Okay, and then over here is this flow chart, and at these different times are milestones. So this guy wants to start training fighter pilots, right? And he's going to do that using the escort mission as a training, and I'll show you how that works later. And his goal by 4 to 6 weeks is to have any given pilot in this training program up between 45 and 50 experience and 70 air skill. Okay, once they achieve that, around the 6 to 8 week mark, or around the 6 week mark rather, he's going to change the mission type to strafing. Okay, and he's going to continue training to this standard until his pilots get between 50 and 55 experience level and 70 strafing skill. Okay, and again, I will explain how to do all of this in the game. Let's look at another example. For a level bomber pilot, he's going to start the training regimen at ground bombing only, and he's going to train it for 4 to 6 weeks until his pilots get between 45 and 50 experience and 70 ground skill. Then, between 6 weeks and 10 weeks, he's going to swap these pilots out to low naval attack training, and he's going to train them up to 10 weeks from the start of this until his pilots have between 50 and 55 experience and 60 to 70 low naval bombing skill level. Okay, I'm not going to read every single one of these, but basically each type of pilot that he's trying to train, he's got a duration and his goals for that time in this training and what he's going to switch to after that. Okay, so what you need to do as the commander of your military here is you need to come up with some goals and milestones for your pilots, so you know when they reach a certain level of skill what you want to do with them. Okay, everybody has their own opinion as to how this should go. You may look at this chart as a seasoned player and go, this is completely nonsense. I don't like this. I think he's wasting time here. We don't need a strafing skill, whatever. Okay. Or you may look at this and go, wow, this is really good. I think I want to start following this because it's got like a structure to it. You need to come up with your own plan. And once you do, you need to follow it. So what I'm going to do now is, now that you've seen this plan, we're going to use this as a reference point. I'm not saying this is the optimal way to do it. I'm just showing you this is a plan. And now I'm going to show you how to execute this plan in game. Okay? Okay, we're back. It's time for us to look at some stuff. So, as you recall from the chart we were just looking at, the gentleman who made it, or woman, who knows, wanted to get their fighter pilots up to a skill level of about 70, an air skill level, and an experience level between 45 and 50. So, after that, he transitions to another training regimen for those fighter pilots. So, what I'm going to do now is show you how you would do the next thing. So let's look at a Nate unit here. Let me find a better one. I know there's a good one on here. Okay, this Nate unit. Let's take a look at these guys. Remember, to look at the pilots, you click on the pilots button down here. And we're going to sort by air skill. So, per that gentleman's chart, after 4 to 6 weeks of training, these pilots have now reached a skill level of around 70 and an experience level between 45 and 50. Okay, he's met his first training goal. Now he wants to transition to a new training goal. And from the chart, he wants to train another 2 to 4 weeks on the strafing skill. That would be over here, strafing. Okay, it says staff, but it's actually strafing. And what does that mean? Well, strafing is the ability for these guys to go down and strafe targets on the ground at low altitude and cause ground attack damage. But as it pertains to fighter pilot training, it also increases the defensive skill. And what is defensive skill? Defensive skill is their ability to evade during dogfights and combat, and avoid damage and avoid getting shot down. The higher the defensive skill of the pilot, the higher the likelihood he has of dodging getting shot down. So the gentleman with the chart that we just looked at wants to train strafing, not so much to get these pilots great at strafing, because honestly that's a great way to get your pilots shot down for nothing, but it helps you train the defensive skill. So I'm going to show you now how you would switch the training over. So you go back to your squadron screen, and here's a couple things you have to know whenever you're doing training. The training level must always be 100, and the range should be 0. Get used to that now. Training at 100, max range 0. Your pilots will never over fatigue, and you will incur almost no ops losses, if any ops losses, with this configuration. The game recognizes that this is a training mode, and since they're not actually really leaving the confines of the hex or the base, they're not really flying that far, and they have less chance of, crashing. So we get that going. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the mission to sweep. Okay. And then we're going to set the altitude to 100, which is the absolute lowest altitude setting you can set. Okay. If you do this configuration here, your pilots will now switch from training air, and they will now train strafing. In addition to that, they will also get training in defensive and a little bit of air and a little bit of experience. But this is where you're going to make your money with this training plan. So what you will do then, following that chart, you will train these pilots in strafing skill configured this way to make them strafe for another 2 to 4 weeks. And in that time, these pilots should then be at a strafing ability of 70, an air ability of 70, an experience level of between 50 and 55. And I'll tell you right now, the defensive is going to be pretty high up there as well. And at that point, the chart implies that these pilots are now ready for frontline combat. Okay? So, again, very important when you're doing training only. Whenever your squadron you've designated to train pilots has no intention of going into combat, getting bounced by fighters, having to do anything except train, you always use 100 and range 0. There is absolutely no benefit to going higher than 0 for range. All that will do is make your pilots your pilots more tired, increase your fatigue level. It will also increase the fatigue level of the aircraft that you're using until some of them start breaking down, and you run the risk of then incurring operational losses due to those things. Planes getting worn out, pilots getting worn out. So remember that. 0, 100. Now, what I want to do next is show you how the game actually determines how a pilot gains skill and experience. Okay, how does it know when the number changes to the next one? How does it know when a pilot has accumulated enough of whatever skill they're training on to gain a green number, right? As you recall, green numbers are good. That means they've gained skill in whatever category during the last turn, okay? And again, orange means they've been training and they've gained experience however they did it, or a skill, over the last month. Green is what we really want to see. But how does a game determine when they get green? I'm going to show you right now. Stay tuned. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the Pilot Management Addendum. This is an extra file inside your manuals section of your game directory. And this is Warner Pacific Admirals Edition specific changes from the base game. Okay, so this basically explains some of the nuts and bolts as to how the game calculates training. So you can take a look at this yourself, but what I will tell you is that it's a little convoluted and complicated. Okay, it talks about how points are accumulated for skills and experience, and once a certain level is reached, the point is added to the skill and experience level. You don't get to see the points. They're done off screen behind the hood. You don't know how many points it takes to make a pilot go from level 50 to level 60. You don't know how many points it takes to go from air skill 68 to 69. We don't see that, okay? And you can read through this yourself. I'm not going to read this verbatim because you're not here for me to read to you. But it talks about different factors that can change how you can get pilots to go faster. It talks about if the pilot's level is less than 50, if the pilot's in a dedicated training group with instructors. I'll tell you right now, if you're playing one of the main game scenarios, like Scenario 1 or Scenario 2, you're not going to see the training groups per se, because that's something that you would have to use the game editor to make. Okay, I'm not aware of any actual training groups that are in the stock scenarios. This is something you can make for yourself, or maybe somebody else made for dedicated training squadrons that are only to be used for that. Okay. In which case there are some exceptions to how pilot training is done. But you can look at this yourself, but I just want you to see this is how the game decides when your pilots gain experience or don't. It's right here. And it's abstracted, so you won't get to necessarily see all these calculations. You're just going to have to look at your pilots from one day to the next and see if their number turned green. If it turned green, that means that they've increased in skill for that particular category, whether it be experience or one of the other skills. If it is orange, orange means that they have gained skill over the last month, but nothing from the last turn. Green is what you want to see. All right? If they're white, that means there's been nothing. They may have gained some points, but it didn't raise their skill or experience level. Is that clear? I don't know if it is. I read this 4 times, and I was still scratching my head as to what exactly it was saying. But again, you guys can read this for yourself. It's the Pilot Management Addendum, and that is available to you in the manual section of your game file directory, or the game directory in the manuals thing. Okay, let's go back in game and talk about how to actually train different types of missions. All right, we're back in game now, and what I'm going to do now is go through all the training missions, explain to you what they are, how they work, and how to get your pilots to train that particular skill. And this is for people who don't know anything about the game and are starting from scratch. If you're an expert here, if you've been playing for 10 years, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. But if you're new, I got you. So let's start with fighter pilots, okay? Let me find one for you. Okay, we got a Nate unit here. So let's say we want to start training these guys in their basic skill, right? Which is going to be air skill. Wow, look at these guys. You remember what the colors mean, right? What is green? Right. They got trained, they gained experience, or they gained skill within the last turn. What does orange mean? Right. It means that they gained experience or skill over the last month. All right. Let's say we want to train these guys on air skill. Okay. This is how you would go about doing it. You start here. You click on training. You go to 100%, max range 0, and anything between 5 and 10,000 feet for standing training is fine. And you can either use sweep or escort. So I like to use 5,000 feet at sweep. I can't tell you that using 10,000 feet, for example, at escort does anything different. It's just something that I use, okay? So you can either use 5 to 10,000 feet, sweep or escort, and that will train your pilots in air skill, and it will also slowly train their experience level, okay? And you'll do that for what, 4 to 6 weeks. And then when you're ready to start training their strafing / defensive skills more, and by the way, they will also gain defensive skill when they train for air. What is defensive skill? Defensive skill is their ability to evade when they're getting shot at from behind. It's their ability to like bank and turn and avoid getting shot down, okay? When you're ready to transition from air skill to strafing and defensive, and again, hovering over these skills sometimes will give you a tooltip as to what they mean. For whatever reason, it's not doing it for me today, but it will on other situations. Okay, when you're ready to train that, what you'll do for the pilots here is you will switch it to 100 feet, same training, max range 0, and leave it on sweep, and that will train defensive skill. Okay? And basically, those are the primary things you want to worry about for a straight fighter. For a fighter bomber, you're going to want to do for, let's say you're ready to train for the actual fighter bombing, okay? What you're going to switch to then is strafing again. So if it's a fighter bomber, you'll just use strafing skill, okay? That's the skill that's used for fighter bombers to do their attacks. Let's talk about level bombers now. So level bombers, for example, see, this Lily here is a medium level bomber. So these pilots are going to be trained as bomber pilots. And let's say we want to train them on regular ground bombing. See, ground B stands for ground bombing. How do you train that? Here's what you do. Training, 100. Maximum range, 0. 10,000 feet works well for me. Individual results may vary. I recommend 10,000 feet. To train ground bombing skill, you would use any of these missions here. Airfield attack, port attack, naval attack, ground attack. All of these give you the exact same training. Don't ask me why they gave you 4 different options to do the same skill. You don't get any other value from training airfield, port, naval. They're all the same. Okay. Now, that being said, I have seen, and I can't substantiate this. This is more anecdotal than empirical. I feel like when I train on airfield attack, my pilots gain defensive skill faster, but that is not proven. So what I recommend you do is get 2 identical aircraft type units, right? 2 Lily units, and train the pilots, one on airfield attack and one on ground attack, and see how the skills change. If they kind of come up the same way, then you know that what I just said is nonsense. But if you notice a definite difference that one set of pilots is gaining defensive skill faster on one training mission than the other, then you know that's what you want to do. Okay? That's how you train ground bombing. Or ground bombing, yeah. Let's say you want to train these level bomber pilots to do like naval attack. Let me show you how you're going to do that. So look at these pilots. There's different types of naval attack, right? You have naval bombing, naval torpedo, low naval. All right? These are 3 different things. And then you also have strafing, but I don't recommend you mess with that for bombers because you're just gonna get them shot down. So if you want to train naval bombing, which would be kind of a conventional level naval bombing, you would set this to naval attack, and you would set the altitude to 1,000. Oh wait, I'm sorry. We're doing regular naval bombing, 2,000 and up. Anything from 2,000 to 10,000 or more will get you naval bombing. Okay. If you want to do low naval bombing, which is AKA skip bombing, you would set the altitude down to 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet is what the game uses to trigger a skip bombing attack by your aircraft, and it will train this skill here, low N, low naval. Well, let's say you have a Japanese bomber squadron like a Nell or a Betty, and you want to train those pilots on how to do torpedo attacks. You would do something like this. Observe. Let's find a Betty unit. Betty unit. Okay. You would go training 100, range 0, and for a naval attack using torpedoes, you would click it onto torpedo, and what that will do is train naval torpedo skill. I recommend you do 2,000 feet and up, because how the torpedo attacks work in this game is you can set these up bombers to come in at any altitude you want, but they will always drop down to torpedo altitude later on. But this altitude that you set them in when they're coming in can reduce the amount of flak they take on the approach in initially. But once they drop down to their torpedo attack altitude, then they're at the mercy of the low level flak. It's something like 200 feet for the attacks that they do. So I set mine for 7,000 feet or 8,000 feet, naval attack on torpedo. And that will train the naval torpedo skill and a little bit of defensive and a little bit of experience. Now, if you want to train naval bombing again with this same unit, you would just switch this to bombs. Now it will start training naval bombing. So you need to be very aware of what mode you're training in. Okay? Don't be training B-26 pilots as the allies for naval. Well, actually, you know what? I take that back. It won't even give you the option to train for torpedoes because it doesn't have them. Just be very cognizant of what kind of aircraft you're training on and what you want the pilots to do. Okay? Let's take a look at let's take a look at like a patrol plane. Okay? What is the primary mission of these float patrols? It's naval search. Well, how do you train naval search? I'm going to show you. Training 100, maximum range 0, altitude anywhere between 1 and 10,000 feet. I use 6,000 feet. Okay? Once you have it set there, you'll go over to naval search. And what that will do, it will start training Nav S, naval search. The higher the naval search rating your pilots have, the higher likelihood they have of spotting and identifying ships at sea. Okay? And if they have very high naval search skills, it could trigger an actual attack. Okay? Where they swoop down and attack the ship that they have spotted with whatever armament they're carrying on board, which, depending on the range that they're set to, could be, it's usually bombs, right? But it could be torpedoes, and it could be any combination of these weapons here. That's the try naval search. Let's look at training for ASW, which is a very important thing. I have some units here in Manchukuo that are training naval or ASW. So to do ASW, which is anti-submarine patrol, you set this to 100, range 0. I like to use altitude 1,000. I have no proof that training at 5,000 or 1,000 does anything different. It's just what I use, because I typically conduct my ASW missions at 1,000. So I try to match the training to the actual way that I conduct the missions. Setting training, and then you click ASW patrol. And you'll notice here I've already been using that, And some of these pilots have been training for a while. Look at how high this ASW rating is. Anything in the 60s to 70s, these guys are going to be submarine killers. This will trigger an attack on submarines almost every time they spot one, when your pilots have this level of training. Okay, when you do that, it'll train here, a little bit of defensive, and a little bit of experience. Are you guys starting to get the idea here? I don't think I need to go through every single mission for you guys to get the gist of this, right? Let's look and see if we have any recon units. It's kind of the same thing. So okay, well, I don't have a recon unit handy, but I have a transport plane. So to train transport pilots, you do the same thing. You go to training 100, range 0, altitude anywhere between 5 and 10,000 feet works fine. Then you click on transport. There's not much you can do for these guys, right? And what it will do is it will train their transport skill. What does that do? Well, it helps reduce the amount of ops losses you take for one, because the higher the transport training level is, the less they're going to crash your planes when they're transporting stuff. And I think it also helps keep the planes from getting less fatigued, and it may actually help move more stuff. That I'm not certain on. I'm not entirely certain what the value of training the transport pilots is. It can only be good. Okay, that's all I can tell you. I can't give you something tangible to tell you exactly what it does, but I can tell you that the more they're trained, the better they'll be. Okay, whether it be to less ops losses or more cargo moved or less fatigue by the pilots, whatever the case may be, the higher this skill is for transport pilots, the better. Are you guys starting to get the idea? Training at 100 at max range of 0, those are probably the two most important takeaways. You also know that the altitude plays a role, not so much for every training type, but for bombing, for strafing, for things like that. The different altitudes will train a different skill. Remember, for low naval bombing, it's 1,000. For regular naval bombing, it's 2,000 and up. For fighters to strafe, it's 100 feet, which is just clicking all the way down here till you don't have anything else. That's the lowest you can go. You guys getting the idea? Good. Let's see if there's any other aircraft type I can think of, or any kind of special mission. All right. Well, this is a recon unit, right? The Dina. This is pretty self-explanatory, right? You have a recon plane. If you want to train recon, you'll set the range to 0. Altitude is fine at 10. Anything more than 10, you start increasing their fatigue level. And now you would just click on recon. And what does that do? It trains the recon skill. Why is that important? The higher the recon level is, the higher the chance that your recon mission is successful. If you're ever playing this game and you listen to it and you hear the little camera clicks, that was probably a terrible. Yeah, that was terrible. Anyway, that sound means that you had a successful recon mission. That means that the hex or base that you set the plane to recon, if you get that sound, it means that they took a picture and you're going to get some information from that. There are times where you'll send a recon plane out and they don't have a successful mission. They come back and you get no data from that hex. And what will cause that is a low recon skill. So again, the key here, when you see anything over 60 for basically any of these skills, the chances are high that they will be successful in that mission type, whatever it is. So 60 should be your absolute bare minimum skill level for any mission. Okay. All right. So now that we've talked about how to train the skills, let's talk about how to train the experience, because that's something different. This experience level is like a catch-all, right? Think of it like a multiplier. The higher the experience level here, multiplied by their skill level in the mission they're doing, means that they will have a higher likelihood of success. But how do you train experience? Well, you do train experience by just doing the training mission itself. But after a while, you're going to start slowing down. It's like an inverse parabola. You're going to get to the top of it, and it's going to start plateauing, right? The next way the only other way to start gaining experience once you kind of plateau in training is to do operational missions. Okay? And I'll show you how I'll give you an example of one you can do for your pilots. Let's say we have a fighter pilot unit. I think we have some nates somewhere that were really good. Okay, look at these nates. Look at these skill levels. These guys are basically plateauing now, okay? They're they're kind of running out of air skill. Like the game basically says any training above 70 is you're basically running out of steam for training, and the only way to gain more experience or skill in that thing is through operational missions and getting kills, all that stuff. So you see over here how we have these mission counts. This pilot here that I transferred in had been flying in frontline units for several months, so he gained 108 missions. That would explain why his experience level is so high, why his air skill is so high. He's been flying missions for months, real world missions. But let's say I am not ready to send this unit out yet, but I want to raise their experience level. This is how you would go about doing it. You would take them out of training and actually give them a real mission to do. So now, even though these guys are not actually going to go face other aircraft, I'm going to give them real missions to fly. So they're going to fly CAP, Combat Air Patrol. And we'll set this to 10,000 feet or whatever you want. Range still stays at 0 because I don't want them venturing away from the base. Because God forbid there's real enemy planes nearby. I don't want these guys actually going into combat yet. They're not ready for that. And then you set the cap level, and you can usually get it up to 70 to 80% as long as the range is 0. But you need to watch this fatigue level. Anything over 25 fatigue, you need to start backing down this percentage. So this is what I like to do to get a lot of experience on my fighter pilots before I send them into actual operational frontline units. I'll set the cap to 80, rest at 20, altitude at 10, max range 0. And what that will start doing is training, it'll start gaining experience faster than the air skill, faster than anything else. And that's how you can raise their experience level up to about 55 or so, maybe even 60, before you even put them into an operational unit. And when they get there, if they have 60 experience with 70 air skill and 70 defensive, they're going to be killers. They're going to be very good pilots. So that's how you can actually train your experience levels on your pilots. Give them operational missions to do. Just don't let them get into combat. How would you do that for an ASW, for example? Like this Mary unit here, right? They've been training ASW for a while, and let's say they're plateauing here. We're gone as far as we're going to get with training here. I need to get their experience level up. Well, guess what? We can do that. Set training to 0, max range 0. I like to leave it at 1,000 for ASW. Then I click ASW Patrol. I set this to 80, set that to 20, and I let them go. So now these guys are going to actually start flying ASW patrols. Now, are they going to find any subs here in Harbin? No. There's no submarines here, and they're never going to find one, and that's fine. But what they will do is start accumulating missions, and they will start gaining experience. And that gives them more survivability and capability once they get to an actual frontline unit. Okay? So whenever possible, and you want to get the experience level up once you've plateaued on the training numbers, switch them to operational missions, okay? Now, there's going to be times where you can't, like naval attack. Here, let's look at G4M Betty's, right? I can't train naval attack through missions. Why is that? Because naval attack needs a target. These guys aren't just going to go fly and bomb the water. When you're on naval attack missions, they are going to try to go and attack something. And if they have nothing to attack, they're not going to fly. If they don't fly, they're not accumulating missions, they're not accumulating experience. So there are going to be situations where you have missions that they're not able to train operationally at their training base because there's no target for them to bomb. Okay? But you can train the skills up to a point, then you just got to throw them into a unit and hope for the best. Okay. So now that I've given you a brief overview on different types of missions and how you train them, you know that the key takeaways here are training at 100, max range of 0, altitude depending on the type of mission, and I've kind of gone over some of these mission types that you can train, okay? Now I want to give you some tips on how you can possibly train your pilots faster. Wait one. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about tonight is some tips for training your pilots faster, okay? So here's tip 1. Stop changing their training plan early. Make a plan and stick to it. if you've got these pilots here in this Nate unit, for example, right? And we want to train them to be good fighter pilots, we're going to decide on this and we're going to stick to it. So we're going to give ourselves 4 to 6 weeks, and we're going to say, I am not touching these pilots until their air skill gets to 70 and their experience level gets to about 45 or 50. Don't touch it before then. Okay? Don't decide midway through, oh, you know what? Now I actually want to train them on ground attack, or I want to train them for a port attack. Don't do that. Make a plan, make a chart, and stick to it. Abide by it. Because what will happen, it's like people who go to college classes and they change their majors 5 times. They're in 5 times. They're in college for 10 years because they keep changing their minds of what they want to do. And in the meantime, this pilot gains a little bit of skill here, gains a little bit of skill here, gains a little bit of skill here, but he's not good at anything, right? Make a plan and stick to it. You're just cheating yourself if you don't. Okay, with that out of the way, there is some other thing that I have learned over the months that I think adds value, but I can't prove it empirically, but I can prove it anecdotally. So I have read on the forums and I've seen in person like myself, that adding a few experienced pilots to a flock of inexperienced pilots somehow does expedite training a little bit. And here's what I'm talking about. You notice here that these averages are pretty low, right? These are all basic training recruits, or recruits out of our replacement pool. So they come to us with an approximate skill level of 35. Granted, it's an average, so you're not always going to get exactly 35. You might get more, you might get less. It averages out to about 35. We're going to train these guys to be level 70 air fighter pilots. But because basically none of these pilots in this unit are any good because they're all new, who's training these guys, right? Well, there is some evidence to suggest that their leadership level can help their training, right? So what you can do is you can select a commander that has a high leadership level, and that theoretically will increase the speed at which they train. Okay? Again, I can't tell you, the manual will never tell you this because it's not written there. I have just read it, and I feel like there is a correlation there. Is it a big change? No. But what could it do? It may shave a few days off getting to level 70 on these pilots over the course of a month, right? So you could move your pilots into the next phase of their training plan a little bit earlier than normal. That's the kind of difference we're talking about. A couple percentage points maybe, right? The second thing you can do is add experienced pilots to this, and I'll tell you what I mean. So we're going to go here, and obviously this thing is full of pilots. We've exceeded the maximum that we can. We've got the max we can get. So I'm going to come in here and take a couple pilots out to make room. So let's get rid of 2 pilots, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my reserve. I'm going to request veteran. I'm going to sort by fighter pilots, and I'm going to find 2 pilots that have a ton of experience and a pretty decent air skill, right? So look here. We got this guy here, Captain Kuroi. We're gonna send him to the 9th Sentai, and then we'll probably send. How about this guy, Genoa? Oh, we did. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not name selecting. Why am I not name selecting, guys? Because it would give us a delay like this. Oh, didn't give us a delay. We'll do it again. Oh, there's a delay. So we got lucky on this one, right? It didn't give us a delay because the delay can be between 1 and 14 days, and it just happened to give us a delay of 1. Anyway, let me show you what this is going to look like. So go back to our pilots. We'll make them all active. Okay, so now, if you notice here, the experience level went up a little bit on both because these guys are changing the average. What I'm getting at here is what I have read and what I feel like I have seen in my training plans is that when you add pilots that have a ton of skill in a particular category you're training in, it seems to speed up the training for the guys that have the biggest delta. So what do I mean by that? The delta is the difference between this guy and these guys, okay? somehow the game seems to understand that these guys are here, and while they will not personally gain a lot of experience and training during this because they're already pretty well off, they seem to affect the lower skilled pilots and help expedite and speed up their training until the delta decreases. So the speed that they help these guys will be slower than the speed that they help these guys. But when you average it out, it helps these guys catch up to these guys faster so that they're all getting done more or less around the same time. Okay, does that make sense? Again, the manual will never tell you this. This is stuff that really smart players have experienced and seen over many years of playing this game, and I'm just passing that information on to you. Can I prove it? I probably could if I sat here and ran 30 turns and showed you the difference between them being there and not. But I don't have time for that. So I want you to try it out. But I'm telling you, you'll see a difference. Okay? So that's the second thing you can do to speed up training. Find a few really experienced pilots that you can dump into a training unit that have a high delta between their skill and the skill of whatever you're training, and it should speed up the lowest pilots and help them catch up to the middle grade pilots during their 4 or 6 week period that you want to train them in. Okay? Okay, I got one last thing to show you about how you can speed up training, and unfortunately it only applies to the allies, so wait here and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, I'm back. So this is the last thing I want to talk about. It has been suggested by many smart players and forum users that training in off-map bases speeds up training. To what extent, I don't have any number to tell you. 5%, 10%, maybe something like that. The unfortunate thing is that the only people who have access to off-map bases are the allies. So here's an example of one, Eastern USA. This is not a base that you can march to or sail to directly, right? You have to use these little lines to get to them, right? So a unit here in LA would travel by rail this way and go off map to Eastern LA. So what tends to happen is that you train your pilots off base, and it should theoretically speed up their training to the point where if you have a P-38 unit here in Eastern USA and a P-38 unit in March Field, and they're both training at 100 with identical skilled pilots, same amount of aircraft, same everything. Theoretically, the pilots in the off-base or the off-map base will train faster than the ones that are on the map. Again, you have to be an allied player to take advantage of this. The Japanese don't have off-map bases. Okay, all of their bases are on map. So that means if what I'm saying is true, that their training will always be slower. Again, I don't have proof for you that this is true. It's not in the manual, but I've seen it mentioned on the forums, and I've experienced it myself in my games that I've played as the ally, that the pilots seem to train faster off map. So if you're an allied player and you want to train a lot of pilots, I highly encourage you to take advantage of these off map bases. And how would you do that? Okay, you go to March Field here, you pick your aircraft, this P-40 unit, right? And you're going to go transfer to base. You can either do it by selecting on the map, or you can look on the listing here. And here's Eastern USA. It's got supply, it's got a big base, it's got tons of support. We're doing it. So now that aircraft unit is transferring via rail, and you won't see it because it happens off map. And in 2 days or so, it will end up here in Eastern USA, and it will pick up its training. So those are the things that you can do to help speed up your training if you're going to train. So stop changing their mission mid-training cycle. Make a plan and stick to it. Grab some veterans from the front lines or that you got hanging around from your reserve and put them in your training units that have new pilots, and they should speed it up. And finally, if you're the allied player, take as many training units as you can fit, move them off map, and dump them into these bases that are out here. The enemy will never get to them, and they supposedly or allegedly speed up training a little bit faster than if they were on map. So This video has gone way longer than I wanted it to, but this is such an important topic and a complex topic. Again, pilot management and pilot training is a game within a game, and I don't think I even scratched the surface of what there is to know or what there is to say. So, if you feel like I left something out, or you don't agree with something that I said, or you want to ask more questions, please do it. Post a question on the comment section of this video, or come over to my Discord and ask your question there so I can give you faster help. And let's talk about this. Let me help you get better with training pilots and managing your pilots. I'm sure I left out a lot of stuff here because I didn't want this video to be 12 hours long. And this is even too long as it is. But there's a lot to know. So I really hope you enjoyed this. I hope you get a little value out of this. And again, if you have some feedback for me on these things, please let me know so I can make these even better for you going forward. So that's all I got for this one. I'm excited to make another training video tutorial soon. I've got another topic in mind that I really want to talk about so I can kind of finish a bigger series that I'm working on as it pertains to showing you guys some of the basics. So thank you for watching, and I'll catch you soon.